Welcome to 60 Skills. This week we will review Egregores, the occult entities that watch over human destiny by Mark Stavish. Now, Egregores are a very important topic that don't receive enough attention. However, I have been told that people who are particularly skilled in political advisory work and branding find this book by Mr. Stavish quite interesting. Now, in the 60 Skills curriculum, we talk about egregores quite a bit and largely describe them as self-aware energetic constructs that surround certain ideas and that tend to be formed anytime more than one person interacts with another person. So the contents are quite interesting, where he goes over both the historic examples of where this comes from and some very specific examples that can be applied to both the modern and near-modern era, crossing everything from Tibetan Buddhism to the Golden Dawn and more. Pay particular attention to the section on pop culture and the creation of egregores, and most people will see that this is far from an esoteric idea and has many practical applications to how we conduct ourselves in the here and now. What is additionally nice is he has a chapter on freeing oneself from the influence of egregores, as well as, and to me, one of the most important parts of the book, a section on ideas and their consequences. So the book starts with a foreword from James Wasserman, which is well and good. Has the typical acknowledgments page and includes both academic and more professional sources. Finally, a bit of a preamble from the Corpus Hermeticum, Book 16. Every kind of creature is sustained and nourished by the sun. As the spiritual world embraces the physical and fills it out with every different kind of form, so the sun embraces everything in the cosmos, raising up and strengthening all generations. And when they are spent and ebbing, he sends them back away. He then talks about the different choirs of spirits, both good and bad, and how these spirits have been given certain authorities over affairs upon earth. The introduction again goes over the basic concept of egregores as well as some of the historical background behind these. And he often says, egregores are often nothing new but rarely understood. And too often they are given the status of a priori goodness. This is an important concept to keep in mind. So first he starts by defining an egregore. He describes how in the original Greek this was mentioned sometimes as a wakeful entity or the watcher, and goes on to a description of such from the Book of Enoch. Again, some people here may have Jesus allergy, but it is important to understand these things in their original context. So the book addresses three primary questions. One, what is the impact of an egregore on the individual, his destiny, and free will? Two, who or what manages the collective physical body of the group by way of the invisible? And three, how is the management performed and to what end? Now he starts off with a description of Tibetan Buddhism, and this isn't particularly important because, as he states, egregores are not unique to Western esoteric and occult practice. It is something that many groups recognize, even if they address it through different means. So he talks about the Tulku and Tulpa, the power of the mind in action. Talks about the four kinds of spiritual practices that are described by some academics: gentle, expanding, potent, or terrible. And then goes through a modern example of egregores within the Tibetan Buddhist faith. What's very interesting about this book is it gives many concrete examples of how these things work. This particular portion on the power of egregores vis-a-vis your dreams is instructional. Next, he starts on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and related egregores. This is important as in Western Hermeticism and esotericism writ large, the Golden Dawn takes on an outsized presence because it is by far the most commonly practiced system in Western esotericism at this point in time. And it goes through how going through the different grades makes someone more and more contact with the egregore of that system. He also gives an example of Walter Ernest Butler and his life and the things that went on. Next, he gets into the modern era and the French occult revival, broaching such topics as the tarot, for example. Again, all very good reading, and depending upon where you fall within the spectrum of Western esotericism, this may be, in fact, very important to you personally. Next, he gets into the issue of telepathy and mind control through the media. Now, once you understand what an egregore is and how it works, you can see how this effect is particularly important, especially upon those who have no real defense against it. Talks about the issue of Martinism, politics and the occult. Again, for anybody involved in various political or pop culture movements, this is important reading. Now, speaking of which, he has an entire chapter devoted to this. And he starts with some historical examples, such as Jean Dubois, who was one of the philosophers of nature. And he goes on to different kinds of egregores as well. Now he talks about some very specific things, such as Lovecraft and his massive influence upon modern fiction writing. And of course, one of my personal favorites, Robert E. Howard, the author of Conan the Barbarian, who committed suicide at the age of 30. He also gives many other real examples. Now here he talks about the ancient mystical order of the Rosy Crucis, AMORC. And in here they get into a lot of detail involving psychic creations. Sounds an awful lot like an egregore to me. So they go into more and more detail, and again, depending upon where you fall in terms of esoteric practice in the West, a lot of this may have a lot of direct application to you. Now, this is an interesting chapter on freeing oneself from the influence of egregores. This is important, and particularly if you haven't mastered something as Akasha and non-dual light, is going to be a very important interest to you. Talks about different ways of breaking this, both physically and esoterically. Now, it also talks about how you can obtain refuge in an egregore. This is important because keep in mind, as long as the goals of the egregore and your personal goals are in alignment, there's really no issue here. And this is how most conventional religions function. Talks about how to deprogram yourself. Now this to me is one of the most important chapters in the book. This idea of ideas and their consequences. The simple fact of the matter is, many ideas out there may masquerade as an economic system, but are in fact a religion. Or may masquerade as something being good for the environment or one group of people or another, but are in fact none of that at all. This is a highly important idea that has to be investigated by esoteric practitioners because the nature of mass media is to create egregores. When you have millions of people focusing on a given object or entity or idea, every time they do that, they contribute a little bit of energy to that. That in turn feeds back through them. This is a very important concept to understand. Now, This is also really interesting. These are personal accounts of disengaging from various egregores. These are typically religious or esoteric in nature. And since many of the people who watch this channel are active esoteric practitioners, this is something to keep in mind. I won't get into the specifics of it, but it is simply good reading and something to be thought about in terms of what happens if you join an organization. And I do like the title, Do Not Call Up That Which You Cannot Put Down. Now, in addition to this, there's also the issue of the revivification of an egregore. This is an important concept to understand because even if an egregore has been destroyed in a given era, it still can energetically exist for very long periods of time afterwards. In this case, it discusses the rebirth of the Roman Empire via Benito Mussolini and some of the things that happened as a result of that. Now, whether you believe in this or not isn't really an issue. What this does do is it provides an interesting template on how to bring something out of the astral and into the physical. Not that I would encourage many people to engage in this activity. This is here for instructional purposes and to give you an idea of being careful of what you wish for. Finally, there is a wonderful bibliography in the book, which lasts several pages, and for your average esoteric practitioner will give you many months of interesting reading to engage in. And an index, which, as of always, I really appreciate. Now, what is to be done about egregores? Well, as a functional matter, if you want to get away from one, you have to quit visiting it. Additionally, if you have any implements or religious items associated with that egregore, either destroying or getting rid of them is highly valuable too. Finally, since we use the ball above head method in the 60 skills curriculum, having control of your own akasha and non-dual light are mandatory parts of maintaining your free will in the face of these empowered thought forms, because once you've mastered mental wondering, your ability to engage them hits high gear. So these are all some things to think about. I hope you enjoyed today's review of Egregores, the Occult Entities That Watch Over Human Destiny by Mark Stavish. And if you enjoyed this, please give us a like and hit the subscribe button. And if you would like to learn more about this or purchase your own copy of the book, there is a link that goes over to Amazon, and this helps benefit the channel as well. So, as always, practice hard and be well.